It was a typical Sunday afternoon. The sun was shining, and the house was filled with the warm sounds of family chatter. My niece, always full of energy and curiosity, was bouncing around the living room as usual. We were gathered for a family lunch, my parents, siblings, and a few cousins. The atmosphere was relaxed, the kind of day where time seemed to stand still. Everything seemed normal until my niece suddenly grabbed my phone. With a mischievous grin, she started swiping through the screen, curious about the apps and settings. As I glanced over, I thought nothing of it first. But then with a smirk, she looked up at me and said, "Mom says this is just a cheap knockoff. It doesn't even look real." My heart skipped a beat. I paused. What did she mean? My phone, which I had carefully chosen, was no cheap imitation. I had saved up for it, researched every feature, and been so proud of it. I couldn't believe my ears. How could she think that? Before I could say anything, she continued, "It's probably just another fake one, like those things you see on the internet." Her words stung. My family had gathered around, overhearing the conversation, and a few of them chuckled. But I could see the doubt in my niece's eyes, and it bothered me. This was supposed to be a fun family gathering, not a chance for anyone to question my choices. But what she didn't know was that there was far more to my phone than she could ever imagine. She was about to find out that what she thought was a cheap knockoff was actually something far more valuable than she realized. I stood there, shocked, trying to wrap my mind around what my niece had just said. A cheap knockoff? I repeated, almost unable to believe my ears. She was still holding my phone, swiping through it with that same confident smirk. The laughter around the table began to grow, and I could feel the heat rising to my cheeks. Everyone could hear what she had said, and I was suddenly aware of how much my pride in my phone had just been challenged. She's just joking, I told myself, trying to brush it off. After all, kids say things without fully understanding the weight of their words. But the way she said it, with so much certainty, made me question if I'd been missing something. Maybe I was overreacting, but I couldn't help but feel defensive. My niece, noticing my silence, continued, "Yeah, I saw one of these online the other day. It's one of those cheap knockoffs that people buy just to look like they have the real deal." She made air quotes when she said "real deal," as though mocking the very idea that my phone could be the real thing. I felt a knot in my stomach. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a small comment, something that could be laughed off. But to me, it was more than that. This was a phone I had spent months saving up for, the one I had researched so carefully. I'd chosen it because of its amazing features. Features I had shown off to friends and family when I first got it. I was proud of it. So hearing my niece, who was just a teenager, dismiss it like it was nothing felt personal. It wasn't just a knockoff to me. It was my choice, my hard-earned purchase. As she continued to swipe through the screen, I could see the casual disregard in her actions. She wasn't even interested in the apps or the features. She was more focused on the idea that it was fake. And just like that, a wave of frustration washed over me. Maybe she's right, I thought. Maybe it's just another overpriced gadget that doesn't really do anything special. Maybe I've been fooling myself this whole time. But then I quickly pushed the thought away. I knew what my phone was capable of. I knew the value behind it. It was no knockoff. It was as real as any other high-end device on the market. But how could I prove that to my niece, who had already made up her mind? "Come on," I said, try to sound casual, even though I could feel my voice trembling slightly. "It's not a knockoff. It's one of the best phones out there. You just don't know it yet." I reached out to take the phone from her, but she pulled it back playfully, like she was teasing me. "Well, it doesn't look like the ones the influencers have," she said, her tone now becoming more of a challenge. "If it's so good, why doesn't everyone have it? Mom says only people who don't know any better buy stuff like this." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Influencers. People who don't know any better? She was talking about me as though I didn't understand what real value was. I suddenly felt like I was being judged for something as simple as a phone in my hand. I wanted to argue, to explain just how wrong she was. But I held back. This wasn't the time to get into a battle about something so trivial. My mom, overhearing the conversation, chuckled lightly. "Oh, come on, give her a break," she said with a smile. "She's just being a teenager. You know how they are." The rest of the family laughed along, and for a moment, the tension lifted. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling of being dismissed, not just by my niece, but by the judgments of people who had no idea what they were talking about. I sat back in my chair, my eyes still fixed on my niece, who was now passing my phone around my cousins, showing it off like it was just another gadget. As the conversation continued around me, I couldn't help but think about what she had said, but I wasn't about to let this slide. The more I thought about it, the more I realized there was no way I could just let her walk away thinking my phone was a cheap knockoff. It wasn't just about a phone anymore. It was about standing up for what I valued and showing her that sometimes appearances aren't everything. I couldn't shake the frustration I felt as the afternoon wore on. My niece, still holding my phone, was happily passing it around to anyone who would take it. I could hear her telling my cousins about the cheap knockoff she'd seen online, laughing as if it was some sort of joke. Everyone was just going along with it, thinking it was funny, but for me, it wasn't funny anymore. I had spent months saving up for this phone. It wasn't just another gadget to me. It was something I had worked hard for, something I'd carefully chosen because it had everything I wanted in a phone. So, seeing it treated like some kind of low-cost imitation was starting to really get to me. Then it hit me. Maybe this was a moment to finally set the record straight. No more pretending I didn't care. I had to show her that what she thought was a cheap knockoff wasn't just another phone. It was something way more impressive. I stood up, walked over to where she was sitting with my phone in hand, and said, "You really think it's a knockoff, huh?" I didn't raise my voice, but there was a definite firmness in my words. She looked up, surprised, and nodded confidently. "Yeah, totally," she said, almost too casually. "I mean, look at it. It doesn't even look like one of those big brands. It's probably just another fake, right?" I took a deep breath. "All right, then, you want to see what makes it special." I could see the skepticism in her eyes, but she didn't say anything, so I began. I grabbed the phone and quickly pulled up the camera app. "Let me show you something." I turned the camera around and pointed it toward the living room. I took a quick photo of the room, but as I was about to turn the phone off, I switched to the editing mode. The phone had an AI-powered camera that could edit images on the fly, adjust lighting, and even recognize objects. I tapped a few buttons, and within seconds, the image was enhanced to look like it had been professionally lit. The colors popped. The shadows softened. It looked incredible. "Whoa!" she muttered under her breath. I could tell she was starting to get curious. But I wasn't done yet. I went on to show her another feature. "Now, watch this," I said, swiping to settings. I pulled up a feature that allowed for ultra-fast file transfer between devices. I quickly sent a large video file from my phone to another device nearby. In a matter of seconds, it was done. No lag, no waiting. "All right, that's impressive," she admitted, now visibly taken aback. "But that's just one thing." I smiled. "There's more." I showed her the phone's unique biometric security features, the custom software that allowed for split-second app responses, and exclusive high-quality sound system it had. Features that I knew made this phone stand out from all the others. At this point, I could see her facial expression change from disbelief to genuine interest. "Wait a minute," she said, her voice now much softer. "This is a real deal, isn't it?" I nodded. "Yes. This phone is far from a knockoff. It's actually one of the best on the market. People just don't know about it because it's not your typical brand." My niece looked at me, eyes wide, as if she had just learned a secret that no one else knew. "I had no idea," she said, clearly a bit embarrassed. "I thought it was just another cheap phone, but it's got all these crazy features." I couldn't help but laugh a little. Yeah, sometimes what's popular isn't always the best. It's easy to assume something based on what everyone else is saying, but you should never judge a book by its cover, or in this case, a phone by its brand. As she handed the phone back to me, her expression had shifted entirely. "I'm sorry for calling it a knockoff," she said quietly, her tone sincere. "I had no idea. It's actually way cooler than I thought." At that moment, I realized it wasn't just about proving my phone was better. It was about showing her, and maybe even myself, that it's easy to jump conclusions, but sometimes we need to take the time to understand something before passing judgment. The room was quiet for a moment, the family now fully aware of the turn of events. My niece had learned her lesson, and in some ways, so had I. It wasn't just about the phone anymore. It was about the importance of knowing the truth and not allowing assumptions to dictate our opinions. The room had fallen silent, with everyone still processing the surprising turn of events. My niece, who had confidently dismissed my phone earlier, now looked at it with newfound respect. Her earlier mockery had faded, replaced by an expression that I couldn't quite place. Surprise, maybe a little embarrassment, or even admiration. But most of all, there was something else in her eyes, a realization. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly trying to find the right words. "I didn't know," she admitted, her voice small. "I guess I just assumed because it didn't have the big name brand. It wasn't anything special." I nodded, letting her words settle. This was more than just a phone. It was a lesson, not just for her, but for everyone sitting around the table. The whole family had witnessed how quickly judgments could be made without understanding the full picture. And, more importantly, how wrong those assumptions could be. I began looking around at my family. It's easy to dismiss something when you don't really understand it. We see a name, a label, and we think that's the most important thing. But what if it's not? What if the real value lies somewhere deeper, in the things people don't see right away? My niece looked at me thoughtfully. "So, you're saying it's about more than just a brand?" "Exactly," I said, my voice gaining strength. "We live in a world where everyone is obsessed with labels, whether it's the latest gadget, the most fashionable clothes, or the most popular people. But sometimes we forget to ask what really matters. A brand doesn't define quality. A name doesn't determine worth. It's about the substance, the features, the character, the value that's not immediately visible." My niece was quiet for a moment, then asked, "But how do we know if something is really worth it if we can't see the brand?" "Good question," I replied, smiling. "Sometimes you have to look beyond the surface. It's about doing your research, finding out what really makes something valuable, and not just jumping on the bandwagon, because it's what everyone else is doing. That's what I did when I bought this phone. I didn't buy it because of the brand name. I bought it because of what it could do, because it was exactly what I needed." I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was starting to get it. The lesson wasn't just about phones. It was about life. We all make assumptions based on what we see and hear. But how often do we take the time to dig deeper, to find out what truly matters? "I get it now," my niece said, her voice more confident. "It's like, I've always thought I needed the most expensive stuff, or the stuff that everyone else has. But maybe that's not always the best choice." I smiled, proud of her for understanding. "Exactly. Sometimes the best things aren't the most obvious ones. They don't come with flashy labels or advertisements. They're the things that are quietly valuable, the ones that make a real difference in your life. And it's up to us to recognize that." As I looked around at the rest of the family, I could see the impact of the conversation. My mom was nodding thoughtfully, and my cousin seemed deep in thought, too. It wasn't just my niece who had learned something. It felt like everyone had taken something away from this. My mom said after a pause, "This whole conversation reminds me of how we sometimes judge people based on appearances, too. We're quick to form opinions, but we don't always know what's going on beneath the surface." I hadn't expected my mom to chime in, but her words were exactly right. This lesson about the phone had expanded into something much more meaningful. It wasn't just about avoiding shallow judgments. It was about understanding that real value isn't always easy to spot, whether it's in things or in people. I looked at my niece, who was now nodding thoughtfully. "Thanks for showing me that, Aunt," she said, her tone sincere. "I guess I'll think twice before calling something a knockoff next time." I smiled, feeling a sense of relief and pride. "No problem. I'm glad we could talk about it." As the lunch continued, the mood shifted. The light-hearted teasing had turned into deeper conversations about judgment, value, and how we perceive the world around us. In the end, It wasn't about the phone. It was about a lesson that would stick with us long after the meal was over. And for me, that was worth more than any high-end gadget. As the afternoon wore on, the mood had lightened. What started as a playful argument about a phone had turned into something much more significant. My niece had learned a valuable lesson, and so had I. We both realized that assumptions could often cloud our judgment, and that true value isn't always tied to what's immediately visible. The rest of the family, who had been laughing and teasing earlier, now looked at me with a new level of respect. The phone had gone from being just another device in the room to something that symbolized a deeper understanding. It wasn't about the name or the brand. It was about the worth we assigned to things based on what truly mattered. As I sat back in my chair, I couldn't help but reflect on how small moments like these can have such a lasting impact. A simple comment from my niece had sparked a conversation that changed the way we viewed the things and people around us. I realized that sometimes we're so caught up in the world of labels and appearances that we forget to look deeper to understand the real story. My niece, who had once confidently labeled my phone a cheap knockoff, was now more thoughtful in her words. She had started to understand that the value of something or someone couldn't always be measured by the surface. She wasn't just talking about phones anymore. She was talking about life. As for me, I had been reminded that standing up for what I believe in and sharing what I knew was worth more than any material possession. It wasn't just about proving my phone's worth. It was about showing my niece and everyone else in the room that what really matters is a depth and substance that's often hidden beneath the surface. Later that day, as everyone gathered to leave, my niece came up to me with a small, sincere smile. "Thanks for showing me," she said, her voice soft. "I'm sorry for calling it a knockoff earlier. I didn't know." I smiled back, feeling a warm sense of pride. It's okay. We all make judgments, but it's what we learn from them that counts. She nodded, and I could see that the lesson had sunk in. As the family trickled out of the house, I thought about how sometimes life's most important lessons come from the most unexpected places. A family lunch, a playful comment, a moment of frustration, all of it had come together to teach us something far bigger than any phone or material possession. And for me, that afternoon wasn't about a high-end phone or proving my point. It was about the value of understanding, of stepping back before making assumptions, and the power of teaching others through everyday moments. These are the things that truly matter, and in the end, they are far more valuable than any brand name could ever be.